So what do we get feedback from? Didn't hear from Chuck.
So this, we put on, in the bedroom, and then one of my husband,
It's just everybody around.
You can hear the people. Okay. Let's stop one of those. The ones we did. Yeah, it's fine.
But that's the doctor, he's good, and I feel what happened is I was used to it as a course and then people buy it, and I feel bad. People start asking me to come and drink. I was planning on I was thinking of it because doing all these things, that's just the way it is. What was a lot more money. But there's just something irreplaceable about it. And you just don't know, what life is like. Somebody will tell you, and it really hasn't stopped, anxiety, depression, suicidality, and isolation, foundational, and I think fear is something all and polarization. Initially, COVID, we lost the
I'm just wondering if
helping each other, and then I saw that as a hospital. Oh, yeah, because it
nothing.
Ray's
There's only
gonna try
games.
something different, he's gonna go get,
Okay.
so.
Oh, like a microphone? Yeah. Because we
I
can
don't know
look
where
at
we
it.
put it.
Yeah, we can look at it here.
Okay.
Right?
for all of you who have come out in person. Welcome to the Medford Seventh Adventist Church. If this is your first time here, we're so glad that you're here. If it's not, we're so glad you're here. It's good to have you here. For those of you who this is the first time, as you might have noticed, our bathrooms are right out here. We have a drinking fountain out there. If anyone needs water, we have water bottles. If anyone's low on blood sugar, there's snacks back there. I'd like to call your attention, if I may, as we're just getting started here, to this card that's on your seat. It says, "Tell us what you think." Really, the portion of the card where you tell us what you think is the back blank portion. We'd love to hear comments, any suggestions. But please let us know how you heard about this program, and also what you might be interested in for the future. It's our desire here at the Medford Seventh-day Adventist Church to bless our community. We like to do these events where we just want to bless you. We just want to provide something that's relevant, provide something that's going to improve your life, provide something that's going to encourage you spiritually. That's our goal. So throughout this weekend, if you are a guest and you're joining us through this seminar, and we do have some of our church members here, and it's great to see you guys as well. But if you are a guest, we're not asking for anything from you. We're not going to ask you for money. We're not going to ask you for a commitment. We're not going to ask you for any of that. So we're just here to bless you. That's all we're here to do. So if you could let us know what you would be interested in the future, whether it's a marriage seminar, parenting seminar, if you'd be interested in a depression recovery group, whatever it might be, we'd love to know. So please let us know. You can leave this on your chair, or you can put it in, there's a box with a hole in the top of it, back on the table where the snacks are. Sorry for not introducing myself. My name's Pastor Brian. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's a real honor to be able to host this program. I feel like before COVID, we could have hosted this relief from anxiety and depression, and it would have been super relevant. But after COVID, it's ridiculously relevant. Chances are every one of us has either experienced anxiety or depression ourselves or knows someone who does. Would you agree with that? It's super relevant. I'm really grateful that you've come on out, and grateful to be introducing our speaker, Dr. Jennifer Jill Schwarzer. She is a presenter for all over the country, author. She has a background, her education allows her to speak intelligently on this topic, and as a presenter, she's effective in presenting that information. So really grateful, Dr. Schwarzer, for being here. Jennifer, I think you prefer to just go by Jennifer. So really grateful that Jennifer is joining us for this weekend, has been able to make the time to come out across the country from Florida, where she lives, to be with us this weekend. So tonight is the opening meeting, and there'll be 3 different presentations that are going to happen over the course of the weekend. All of these presentations fit together, so really encourage you to not miss any. We'll have another presentation tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., For those of you who are new to this building, we are Seventh-day Adventists, and so we go to church on Saturday. So our church service will actually be tomorrow. We'd love for you to join us for that. She'll be presenting on a transformed mind. That'll be the topic. And then tomorrow evening, same place here, same time, 6:30, she'll be finishing the seminar with a new heart, talking about the inner transformation that God wants to bring about in our life. And we have these biblical principles to guide us in that. So really looking forward to what you have to say on that. At the end of this presentation, there'll be a question and answer time. So as you're listening through the presentations, feel free to take some notes. Write down some things. There'll be some content that goes through, and I encourage you to not forget those questions that may come up. So go ahead and write those down, so there'll be a question and answer time at the end. I think that's it. I'd love to begin with the word of prayer. That's what we do here. We believe that God is the healer, not only of our bodies, but also our minds and our souls. And so we just want to pause and invite his presence to be here with us. So if you just pause with me, I'd appreciate that. Heavenly Father, as we read about Jesus and his ministry on this earth, and how he cared for people who are anxious, how he cared for people who are depressed, how he had compassion on them. God, we thank you that we can invite your presence now, and I pray that you bring about healing in our lives, the lives of our loved ones that are struggling in these areas. We thank you for this opportunity to receive from you, and I pray that you give us ears to hear. So please speak through Jennifer, the words that we need to hear. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Dr. Schwarzer. Jennifer, time is yours.
Are we on? Can you hear me? Testing, testing, testing. Are we gone? Okay. I adjusted the earpiece a little bit, so I hope it doesn't fly off. I think my ears are a little bit larger than normal. It was an issue growing up because my dad always wanted my hair out of my eyes, so he would push it behind my ears, and then I remember my parents fighting over my ears. My dad pushed my hair behind my ears. I don't like her hair in her face. And my mom said, no, she has big ears, and she pulled the hair back over. And my dad, no, I don't want her in her eyes. And literally fighting over me while I'm just sitting there going, are you considering how this is affecting my self-worth? You know, they hadn't heard the message that I'm going to be sharing with you tonight about psychology. But hopefully it won't fly off. It was a little tight. We'll be okay. All right, so I just wanted to say hi, and I'm glad all of you came out. I'm so happy to see each one of you. I hope that what I have to share with you will be a blessing and be meaningful. And like the pastor said, be making notes either mentally or on paper if you're like me and you forget everything. And let us dialogue afterwards so we can process what you hear, because you're going to hear a lot. I am going to be addressing the two most common mental health conditions. I have 15 years of clinical experience as a counselor, and day by day working with clients, this is the stuff that I heard about, anxiety and depression. I would say the vast majority of the people that I worked with had either anxiety or depression or both, maybe subclinical versions of it, but they were struggling with feelings of fear and feelings of sadness. So these are extremely common disorders, and we're going to be touching on some of the most basic ways. I'm going to be very solution-oriented with you. We're going to get a definition and prevalence and all that stuff, but we're really going to focus in on what hacks, habits, and techniques and so forth actually help people with these disorders. So maybe you're someone who's struggled with them, maybe you're someone who knows someone or loves someone who has struggled with these things. Hopefully you'll walk away with lots of tools and lots of things that will help. So I do have some qualifications, as the pastor mentioned. I have 2 graduate degrees in counseling, 15 years of clinical experience. But the thing that really qualifies me to be able to talk to you about anxiety and depression is that I'm a survivor. I'm in recovery. And I'll just be really open with you up front. I've been in public ministry for a number of years. I was, in years past, very involved with music ministry and traveled and sang beautiful spiritual songs and uplifting songs and encouraged people through music and through speaking. And even while I was in public ministry, engaging in helping other people from a platform kind of thing, even during that time, in my private life, I was struggling with feelings of depression so severe that I would have suicidal thoughts. And, my church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, is very fond of what we call the health message. We like to preach, healthy living. And there's this sort of tagline that we engage in. You're going to live 6 years longer if you embrace this message. And I would hear that and I would think, I don't want to live 6 years longer. What good is it to live 6 years longer, hear about how to live 6 years longer if you really want to die? Now, I didn't really want to die, of course, and I never attempted suicide, but I was dealing with what I now understand to be clinical depression. And there wasn't a lot of help for me in the circles that I ran in. But since then, there's been kind of an explosion in various individuals taking the message of mental health into a ministry context, and it's really been a blessing. So my primary qualification is that I'm a survivor, and I'm in recovery from anxiety and depression. I don't want you to think that I'm like some knowledgeable person that's trying to, help everybody, but I've never felt what I'm talking about. I have felt it in the most real way. So it's a little bit of a paradox that one of the first things we do when we're trying to improve our negative emotions is, but this is a fact, and that is that you accept those negative emotions. There's a tension. We need to learn to accept these negative emotions and then do everything we can to improve them. And so it seems kind of counterintuitive to say accept them, but what happens if you don't accept the negative emotions is you end up with what we call secondary disturbance, where you're disturbed and then you're disturbed about being disturbed. So you're anxious, and then you're anxious about the fact that you're anxious, or you're depressed, and then you're depressed about the fact that you're depressed, or you're anxious and depressed about the fact that you're anxious, or depressed and anxious about the fact that you're depressed. Does that make sense? And so you get into that like feeling worse because you feel bad. And so the first thing I want to do is say it's totally normal to have these negative emotions. It's part of our human experience. And in fact, what I'm going to do at the get-go here is talk about what I just went through on my, just before coming out here, Hurricane Ian. I'm from Orlando. And so maybe it's pure self-pity on my part and eliciting sympathy, but I'm going to give you a little slideshow about Ian and the damage to my home, just so that I can sort of explain this whole thing about accepting negative emotions. Okay, I'm not going there first. I want to give you a little background. So it was, I think, Tuesday night. We knew that Ian was coming, and I was trying to clean up my basement, which is an ongoing project. My husband does, woodwork in there, and he has piles of sawdust, and he doesn't have any issue with it, but I take the blower in there and try to blow it out. Yeah, I see some people laughing. You get me. You understand me. We could talk about, let's have a special session to just process. So anyway, blowing out my, what's that? What? Okay, we can talk. Blowing out my garage, and all of a sudden I got something in my eye. All right, so I thought, well, it'll go away. I'll go to sleep, and somehow I washed out my eye a couple times, didn't resolve it, but I thought I'll sleep and it'll probably work its way out. Wake up in the middle of the night, and it's there still, and it's getting worse. So I got in my car and went to the emergency room. And in the emergency room, the doctor put a Q-tip on my eyelid and then peeled my eyelid back. And when she did that, it came out. We don't know what it was. She was just going to look. But it came out. And then I came out of the emergency room, and it was raining a little bit, And I was thinking, and my husband was thinking, they're just making a big deal out of this. This is not going to be what they're saying it's going to be. They're overblowing it. That's what the media does. And it looked that way Tuesday night. But by the time Wednesday came around, it was serious. I felt almost the presence of evil moving into Orlando. The wind began to scream. I have 4 backyard chickens. And so it devolved upon me to try to catch my chickens and get them into the garage so that they didn't get, carted off like Dorothy's house in The Wizard of Oz, Like, these chickens needed to be inside. They didn't seem to understand that. They were having a great time out there running around, finding worms and stuff. But I ended up successfully catching them and putting them in my garage for the night. I've never seen so much poop, but that's a different story. So, be ready for it. It's like concrete. It gets, down into the grain of the concrete. It's really hard. Anyway, it's terrible. But it was worth it for their lives. So I got them in, and then Wednesday night, it started to really get serious. Just the screaming wind outside, the sheets of rain that were like knife-like if you went outside, and just the amount of water coming out of the heavens. So that went on all Wednesday night. I don't think I slept but an hour or two. It's just, there's something in the air, and you just can't shut down. So woke up Thursday morning, and it was still pretty bad, and yet it was going to start calming down a bit on Thursday, and I knew that. So, started thinking about assessing the damage, and toward the evening, got a text from, we have some roommates that live upstairs, got a text from one of the roommates. He said, "This is what's happening in your living room." So what had happened was the shingles had blown off, and the insulation and the drywall had gotten soaked, and this is like swollen with wet insulation. But tell me it doesn't look like an alien. I mean, when he sent that text to me, it just added creepiness to creepiness. And I was fully convinced that Ian was totally evil. So continued my damage assessment. My husband had just put a little cabin, we call it a studio, and he put it right on the edge of the lake. We live on a lake. He had put it on the ground. I said to him, "Michael, you need to put it on stilts because the lake swells, Remember when the lake really swelled a few years ago?" And he was like, "Oh, no, I put it on stilts, Mike." So he put it on stilts, but the stilts weren't high enough. So that's water right there, right up to the bottom. We don't know yet if it's ruined the bottom or insulation or what it's done, but our lake got really full. And then that's the shed that I once had that got blown to bits. This is the hole in the stairwell, and that's the hole in the living room that the alien finally popped, and that's the hole. But the good news is my husband talked to the adjuster today, and they might put on a roof, as part of the, reimbursement. So they meant it for evil, but what? Ian meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. That's from the Bible for those of you that aren't familiar with that story. Where is that? That's in Genesis what? The story of Joseph. Anyway, long story, but sometimes bad things happen, and God does good things with bad things. And I believe that that's the case here. So I just wanted you guys to feel a little bit sorry for me, if you don't mind. And I wanted to normalize negative emotions. If I had gone through all that and didn't have a moment of, and stress, I would not be testing reality. I would not be a normal person if I could go through something like that and not feel negative emotions. So our negative emotions really work for us and in many respects keep us safe. But the fact is that they can become too negative, and they can become a problem in that a preponderance of or an overwhelm of negative emotions can be very harmful to us. So negative emotions are normal, but what happens with anxiety and depression is they come to sort of dominate, and that's when we step in and try to resolve some of those negative emotions. All right, let's get a definition in here. A definition of anxiety, dictionary definition, is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. And a clinical definition is a mental health disorder characterized by feelings of worry or fear that are strong enough to interfere with one's daily activities. That's one of the key aspects of diagnosable anxiety or depression, or any disorder for that matter, is that it has to affect your ability to function. And that's when we diagnose anxiety, is when a person can't function. Dictionary definition of depression is a state of feeling sad. Clinical depression is a mood disorder marked especially by sadness, inactivity, difficulty in thinking and concentration, a significant increase or decrease in appetite, sleeping more or sleeping less. Depression is kind of a disorder of extremes than usual, feelings of dejection and hopelessness, and sometimes suicidal tendencies, including gestures of suicide, suicidal ideation, this type of thing. And as I mentioned a moment ago, these are the two most prevalent disorders. So if I were to take illustration of all the different things that I've seen over the last 15 years that have come into my office that are diagnosable disorders, like things like ADD and things like, eating disorders, they would be there, but they wouldn't be as big as anxiety and depression. These are the big ones. And I'll just give you a basic stat here. About 30% of people globally will at some point in their life have diagnosable anxiety. That doesn't mean they'll be anxious at some point. It means they'll be diagnosably anxious at some point in their life. Roughly 30% of people will at some time in their life be diagnosed natural means. I'm not a dogmatist about this.
But it's working great up here.
you a tool that you can use for the rest of your life so that you are equipped to deal with situations like that, which may arise in your life. If you suspect that someone is suicidal, go ahead and ask them. The evidence is behind that is going to help. Okay, so the first thing you ask is, have you ever thought about taking your life? And if the answer to that is yes, you go to the next question. Do you intend to take your life? This is a really straight conversation here. It's a heavy conversation. But it's an important question. If they say no to intention, you do not have an actively suicidal person on your hands. They're just thinking about it, and it's kind of amazing how many people think about taking their life, but would never consider doing it. At least in my practice, that's been my experience. Then if they say yes to intention, you ask the following 3 questions. Do you have a plan? Do you have a method? And do you have access to the plan? And then do you have prior history? Because prior history is predictive of people completing suicide. So most of the time when you ask people, they're going to possibly say yes to this, but they will not say yes to all of this. If they do, you have an actively suicidal person. Ask them to admit themselves to the mental health unit or a mental health crisis unit in the local hospital or wherever it is in your city. You can look it up online and ask them to admit themselves, and you'll help them through that process. If they say no, you call 911, and 911 comes and does what they call a welfare visit, where they talk to the person face to face, and if they can talk them off the ledge, they do that, but if they can't, they will take them in. You know, this is the kind of thing you have to do. I have had an experience with this of calling 911 on someone. They hated my guts afterward, but then they thanked me later, so that's usually how it works. All right, so that's just a little tool for you. So let's talk about these nature hacks and habits. These are the 8 doctors or the 8 natural laws that govern our physical health, and our brain is a physical organ, and it responds to all of these measures: air, sunlight, temperance, rest, exercise, diet, water, and trust, an attitude of trust. So let's take these one at a time, and I'm going to try to share with you some personal anecdotes. So I used to work with behavioral challenged kids. When I was just starting out in counseling, I had to do what we call mobile therapy to get my hours in. And I would show up at these kids' homes, and these are the kids that just played Call of Duty all day long and killed people on their screens and watched violent movies and then made trouble at school, really troubled kids. And this particular kid, I would always try to get him to come outside with me, and as soon as he would get outside, his attitude would change. It was remarkable how just being outside. The woman who discovered eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy for trauma, how many of you have heard of that? Okay, EMDR is what they call it. It's apparently very effective. The woman who discovered it was walking in a park when she discovered it and moving her eyes back and forth across the field of vision, and that's thought to bilateralize the brain and put it in a condition where it's better equipped to process difficult emotional material. And that's what we naturally do when we're outside. We start moving our eyes back and forth. I cannot tell you how many times I personally, when I'm troubled, have gone on a long walk, and I've said to myself, I'm going to walk until I feel better. And 10 hours later, whatever it takes. So, what about the quality of our air? Now, you guys are in Medford. This place is beautiful. I was driving down from Portland. My kids live in Portland. I was driving down last night in the dark, wondering what I was thinking, driving on these, with these massive trucks, you know. I was thinking, I don't think I'm a good enough driver to be doing this, but I have no choice. But this is beautiful here, and it's wonderful nature all around you, and so you're really blessed. But let's talk a little bit about air quality, because that does affect your brain. High levels of air pollution may damage children's cognitive abilities, increase adults' risk of cognitive decline, and possibly even contribute to depression. This is from the American Psychological Association. It's not a medical institution saying this. It's the APA, and they're not known for talking about medical things much, but they're acknowledging that air quality affects your mood. But the good news is that trees really help to undo a lot of what pollution does. So this is an example. The trees in London remove between 850 and 2,000 tons of what they call particulate matter in the air every year. So that's what happens is pollution produces particulate matter, and that crosses your brain-blood barrier, which is like this protection on your brain that God put in your brain to keep certain things out of your brain, and the pollution gets across it. But these trees take that particulate matter out of the air. Thank God for trees. I love them. So it's also very important to breathe correctly, and we're going to actually do a breathing exercise right now, because I discovered in treating anxiety that breathing very deeply and slowly was extremely effective for people with anxiety issues. And the reason is this: it's a little bit complicated, but let me try to make it concise for you. You have basically three parts of your brain. You have the brain stem and the lower part of the brain, which governs the physical, and then you have a little part in the middle called the limbic system, and it's full of all different kinds of organs: the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, a bunch of different organs that mediate mostly emotion. Okay, so think brainstem, physical, limbic system, emotional, and then the kind of the gray matter that's all folded up and scrunched up that sort of encases your whole brain. That's called the cerebral cortex, and that governs the cognitive. Makes sense? I'm oversimplifying to make it easy to communicate. But brainstem, physical, limbic system, emotional, cerebral cortex, cognitive. Your cognitive faculties can become, well, I'll put it this way: the limbic system in anxiety and depression can become kind of hyperactivated. We call it bottom-up hijacking, where the lower part and the middle part of the brain get sort of inflamed, and they literally suck energy out of the cerebral cortex. So therefore, you're not as rational. You know, when you get emotional, you kind of lose rationality and perspective. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So what do? You take a break, do some deep breathing, and you try to get yourself to calm down so that you can make rational choices, right? So this is what I'm doing here, is I'm trying to get your cerebral cortex re-engaged and get your limbic system to calm down. And the way we're doing it is by getting you to breathe the way that you breathe when you're calm. So you purposely slow and deepen your breathing, and that kinesthetically then reacts on your cerebral cortex and your brain, your whole brain, and gets your brain to function the way a calm person's brain functions. Does that make sense? So what you're going to do is make a very small hole with your lips. Very small. You're going to breathe in to the count of 6, hold for 2, and breathe out to the count of 8. Breathe into the count of 6, hold for 2, breathe out to the count of 8. I'll do it with you once, and then I wrote a song where you're actually going to be syncing up with the song. So I'll do that with you too. But let's just do it once together. So breathe all the way out first. Then breathe into the count of 6. Hold. Breathe out to the count of 8. Okay, so I'm going to slow it down even more than that. And some of you will feel like, oh, I'm not getting enough air. Just take an extra breath. Don't pass out on us right here and have to call the ambulance. That's not what we're looking for. But try to slow your breathing down. This is the benchmark. This is what you're aiming for, is that really deep and slow breathing. Okay, so let's try it. Okay, first you're going to breathe all the way out. All the way out. Now breathe in. Hold. Now breathe out. Now breathe in. Hold. Now breathe out. Now breathe in. Hold. Now breathe out. We're going to do 2 more. Breathe in. Hold. Now breathe out. One more, breathe in. Hold. Now breathe out. How do you feel? How many of you feel calmer? It's almost miraculous. Like, I've had people that were having the beginnings of panic disorder, where they would start having panic attacks, and using this breathing, they were successful in warding off like the onset of panic disorder. So it can be very, very powerful. By the way, a resource for you, if you're on Spotify, look up Jesus Meditations. I did a series of meditations with that young man that was singing in the background. His name is DeVille Peter. He's a wonderful artist, and he does scripture songs. I do a little devotional, and he does scripture music after we do that breathing. So it's like a biblical meditation. Very powerful tool. Just go to Spotify and look up Jesus Meditations. Spotify is a website, and I believe that anybody can go there and listen to that music for free. So check it out. Spotify and Jesus Meditations. All right, so that was successful. Another really important part, and I need to work on this, is posture. Making sure that your back is straight and you are feeling empowered. I had an experience a while ago. I got bitten by a dog. I live in Florida. Everybody has pit bulls. And I was walking down the road, and my neighbor's dog comes careening out. They had left their gate open accidentally, and the dog comes out. And I'm talking to a friend on the phone. And the dog, I didn't know what his intentions were, so I didn't do anything initially, but he came right for my leg. I was wearing jeans, so he went for my leg. But I had learned from my husband early in our marriage, because we did tree planting in the South. I grew up in the North. I learned you got to get aggressive with dogs, so you pick up a rock. Well, I couldn't find a rock, and the dog was right there, but I was kicking him. And I was kicking him in the chest, and I was being aggressive with him. There's a whole therapy for people who've been assaulted where you use power poses to rewire the brain, because typically when you get assaulted, you start adopting these powerless poses. So, power poses tend to counteract that and sort of rewire the synapses in there. So I was just fighting this dog, and that I did not have one moment of PTSD or sleeplessness that night. I was totally fine. And I think it's because I was doing the power poses thing. So posture is really powerful and really good for you psychologically on many levels. All right, let's talk about sunlight. I went through an experience a number of years ago, an interpersonal struggle, and I still will sometimes tank in my mood when I have an interpersonal issue come up and something happened that was really, really hurtful and painful to work through. And I just wasn't getting anywhere 3 months later. And I was kind of feeling well, it should be getting better by now. I should be recovering. And I wasn't. Then I listened to Dr. Nedley, who teaches on anxiety and depression as well. And he said that there's real benefit in getting up early in the morning and getting sunlight exposure early in the morning. Apparently what it does is it boosts your serotonin levels, and then those serotonin chemicals turn into melatonin later at night, and that helps you sleep. For some reason, getting that sunlight exposure within 20 minutes of waking up is the key. So I started to go for my run early in the morning, and it made all the difference. I was finally able to think through and process what had happened and feel better. So sunlight is very powerful. Vitamin D deficiency is pandemic. There's so much of it in our world today. The at-risk populations being people far from the equator, the elderly, darker-skinned people, and people with health issues such as celiac, renal disease, obesity, and liver disease. Low serotonin levels have been linked to vitamin D deficiency, so it might be a good idea if you're struggling to try supplementing with vitamin D, or just getting a little bit of sun once in a while, and trying that. So exposure to bright light within 20 minutes of waking in the morning gives the brain a serotonin boost. That serotonin later turns into melatonin. and aids your sleep. Let's talk about temperance. You know, temperance is not just being temperate with things and not eating too much or whatever, but it's also abstaining from things that affect your brain. And there are things that affect our brains that we're not super aware of in our world today. Let me give you an example of something that happened to me. I ended up with giardia. When my husband and I were first married, we went tree planting and drank out of a nice, clear, cold river, and it was full of giardia. So I ended up with a very severe case of giardia. It's a parasite. Went on quinacrine for it. It's the only thing that works. I didn't know at the time that one of the side effects of quinacrine, which did knock out the parasite, by the way, was toxic psychosis. And I literally came unglued after about a week of taking that drug and thought that the world was coming to an end. And honestly, like, I took it again a few years later for something else, and I wrote a prominent pastor a 4-page letter about women in ministry and equality and stuff like that, and decided, you know, you really shouldn't send this. You should write it all out and get it out of your system, but don't send it. So I had enough presence of mind not to send it, and I didn't, but I still have it on my computer, and I read it once in a while and crack up. So you get the point that we need to be careful what we put in our bodies because it's going to affect our brain. So I'm going to just tell you the truth here. Did you know that they used to use cocaine in over the counter for toothaches? So we don't always know what's good for us. There are some substances that cause problems. Alcohol, it's legal, doesn't mean it's good for you, right? Street drugs are illegal. They're not good for you either. Caffeine, I know I'm making some people mad, but especially if you're dealing with anxiety and depression, caffeine is not your friend. And most clinicians who understand the impact of this will tell you greatly reduce or cut out caffeine because it affects the neurotransmitter balance in the brain. And then nicotine, of course, all those things are going to affect you. Caffeine is the most widely used mood-altering drug in the world. People often see coffee, tea, and I'm going to read it off my computer because the formatting didn't come through. But this is a quote. Hang on just one moment. Sorry about that. I'll find it quickly. Okay. People often see coffee, tea, and soft drinks simply as beverages rather than vehicles for a psychoactive drug, but caffeine can exacerbate anxiety and panic disorders. That's Roland Griffiths, PhD. Alcohol is another problem. Like, people will drink to go to sleep, but did you know that it has a rebound effect and it's going to disrupt your sleep later? Anything that disrupts the delicate balance of neurotransmitters in your brain, you're going to have to recover from. So you're making your brain work all the harder every time you take these mind-altering substances to bring you back to homeostasis. You're putting a burden on your brain and making it have to work harder. Don't give it that job and you'll just do better overall. We can also become excessive about things that are in and of themselves okay. Overwork is a big problem. It's called karoshi in Japan, and apparently they have at least had at one point no limits on the amount of overtime, and people would just work, and they were having problems with people just dying from overwork. So they started limiting the number of overtime hours, and we probably need some of those laws for ourselves in the United States as well, because some people really overwork a lot. So let's talk about rest here. Rest is really an important thing that we often neglect, those of us that like to do a lot. I was touring in Africa. I went many years ago and did some tours and spoke in different places, public schools, all over. The person that hosted me set up 27 talks in 2 weeks. I preached 27 times in 2 weeks. And I remember at the end of it, just wanting to go into a closet and suck my thumb. And I hadn't sucked my thumb for so many years, but I sort of like regressed or something. I was so exhausted, I like melted down. So rest is really important. There's a story told of a man two men that were going to compete and see who could chop the most wood. And one guy just chop all day long. He was really, really trying hard, and he wanted to win the contest. It just stopped for a moment for lunch and just kept chopping. The other guy was taking breaks all day long and, just chilling, but then chopping in between. And at the end of the day, the guy that took the breaks chopped more wood. The other guy couldn't understand why. He was like, I don't get it. I was the one that was working so hard. And he said, you didn't see what I was doing during my breaks. I was sharpening my saw. So sharpen your saw. You get to the point of diminishing returns, when you keep at something. And if you're like me, you just want to finish it. But sometimes that becomes a problem. This is why I'm a Sabbath keeper. The Bible teaches that the seventh day is blessed in a very specific and special way by God. I wasn't raised a Sabbath keeper. I adopted this habit at about 19 years old and started spending the day out in nature before I knew any other Sabbath keepers in a church context. I would just spend the day out in nature. And I have been continuing with that ever since. And believe me, 19 years old was a long time ago. But I can't tell you how blessed I've been because of Sabbath keeping. I devote the whole day to God and to other people. And I've just been able to grow a very large support and friendship network, and it's been great. Resting in the good things. There's a condition, to give us an idea of how important sleep is, there's a condition called fatal familial insomnia, where people lack a certain protein in their brain that enables them to go into the deeper stages of sleep. And so they eventually develop panic attacks, paranoia, and phobias. It affects their nervous system. And then hallucinations, and then rapid weight loss, and then dementia, and finally death. Very few people have this. Only about 100 in the world have this. So it's not very common, but you can just see how important sleep is just by understanding that condition. So the American Academy of Sleep Medicine recommends 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Let me just take a quick poll here. How many of you get 7 to 9 hours? Raise your hand. How many of you get more than that? Okay. Oh, well, you're a kid. Okay. How many of you get less than that? Okay. Chronically less than that? Okay. How many of you get less than that because you are too busy, or you'd like to get more, but you just are too busy? Raise your hand. And how many of you get less than that, but you just don't sleep that much? Now, let me ask you this. Those of you that get less, do you take naps? So if you added everything up, would it still be under 7 hours? Keep your hand up. You're looking at me funny. What? Take a nap? You take naps? Okay. But if you add it all together, then it's like 7 hours? Maybe. Okay. So does anybody get less than 7 hours, including the naps? I'm sorry. That's hard. But there is such thing as a short sleeper. There are people that don't sleep as much as others. They're very rare, but, or maybe you just have some insomnia issues. Okay. Well, anyway, this is what you want to aim for. You also need to rest your stomach. I gradually made changes in my diet from the time I was in high school. I was raised a typical American diet, eating, junk food and Twinkies and meat and just all kinds of stuff. And then I became a vegetarian because I started believing in reincarnation. And my grandmother died during that period. And I thought, if she comes back as a cow and I eat her, that would be a terrible thing. I'm totally serious. That's really what motivated me initially. So it's true. It's true. And then I started trying to cook all this, really healthy food, and it was really rough for a while there. But I eventually learned how to cook. And so I learned to cook vegetarian. I'm mostly plant-based in my diet and just eat a lot of really healthy, natural foods, a lot of fiber in my diet. I really love eating that way. And then I started getting more exercise. I made a number of changes, but the change that had the most profound impact was spacing my meals. At one point, I would not really eat much until dinner time, and then I would eat and then keep eating until I went to bed. And then my stomach would be full, and I would try to sleep with a full stomach, so I'd be trying to digest, sleeping at the same time. I could do neither well, and I would have nightmares. Have you ever had one of those late-night pizza nightmares? Where you think you're coming unglued and you should admit yourself to a hospital, and then you remember, I had a
full medium-sized pizza right before I went to bed. That can happen. It can disrupt your sleep. So I started realizing that was happening with me. And then I heard about spacing your meals. So the way it works is this: your body sheds the lining of your digestive tract during the periods in between your meals. And that's an important cleansing feature of the digestive system. And if you don't allow it to rest, it won't do that as effectively. So what you do is you eat a nice big breakfast, because you want to put the gas in the car at what point in the journey? At the beginning of the journey, right? So you put the gas in the car in the beginning of the day, and then you go on that and you eat natural, whole grains and stuff, and that'll help you, have nice even blood sugar. And then you use nothing but water in between. And then you have lunch, and that's a nice meal too. And then if you eat a meal at night, it's light and easy to digest, and all you have is water in between. That gives you a very even pattern of blood sugar. You're not spiking your blood sugar and then having it dive in reaction. It's also going to give your stomach that rest that you need, and it can be powerful in regulating your mood, because if you're messing with your blood sugar all the time, your mood is going to be impacted. So try spacing your meals. It's just basically 2 to 3 meals a day with 5 hours in between. It's a great idea. All right, let's talk about exercise. Exercise is really essential. How many of you would you say you engage in regular exercise? Raise your hand. Okay, good. Exercise makes us feel powerful. That's what happened to me when I was like fighting off that dog. I felt very powerful, Exercise, gets our muscles toned, and it can affect us psychologically. So I want to give you just a few tips on how to get really good exercise. There's a good book out by John Rady, MD. He mentions that exercise improves memory, focus, motivation, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and something called BDNF factor, which is responsible for brain growth. As we learn, and we learn throughout life, we have learned in recent years that the brain does not age to the level that we previously thought. We were kind of regarding people over 60 as like, you're not going to learn anything new, old dog, new tricks, and that whole thing. It's not true. The brain is what they call plastic, in other words, flexible, and unless there's, advanced aging and or dementia happening, a person can keep learning throughout life. Isn't that a blessing? I'd rather wear out than rust out, wouldn't you? So, God bless the older folks among us, because we're still growing. So that BDNF factor enables you, it really empowers your brain to continue to grow. So John Rady promotes the use of something called high intensity interval training, or HIIT. What you do is you intersperse moderate exercise with intense exercise. So if you're walking, you might walk for 5 minutes and then run as fast as you can for 30 seconds. Now, always with your doctor's permission, so nobody go have a heart attack and blame me for it, okay? Be very cautious about this, especially if you're not used to it. But this is a great way to get some really good cardio without too much effort. And then on your bike, cruising for 5 minutes, pumping hard for 30 seconds. So that's a really great way to get really good brain-growing exercise. And the reason I'm mentioning cortisol here is because what happens to animals and the way nature is set up is that when stress goes up, there's typically physical activity associated with it. So a lion comes into the field, and the gazelle and the wildebeest are going to do what? And the zebra are going to do what? They're going to run. But if your boss is like this lion, and he's nasty, and you're sitting in your cubicle, where do you run off that cortisol? Where do you run off that stress hormone? You don't. So you have to intentionally get that exercise and get to the gym. Or better yet, the best kind of exercise is actually walking. Did you know that? And there's actually research to the effect that hard exercise can actually work against you. People's immune system goes down in function after a marathon. I have a friend whose father was exposed to a child that had just had a polio vaccine right after he ran a marathon. He ended up with polio because the immune system is tapped out after a marathon like that. So it's really not necessary to get excruciating exercise or extreme exercise. Walking is the best exercise. Exercises every muscle in the body. All right, let's talk about diet. There's so many different diets, ways that we can eat And there's a lot of different theories about food out there. Turns out the best one is fruits, nuts, grains, and vegetables. How many of you eat that way? Okay, I tend to eat that way, lots of fruits, nuts, grains, and vegetables, and I just love it. And there's so many things available now for us to be able to eat that way. Okay, so the best thing to do if you want to move in the direction of this healthier diet is when you're at the grocery store, just put more whole plant foods in your cart and less refined and animal foods. And move in the direction of more plant foods. And you'll be amazed as you start to experiment with eating these plant foods at how tasty they can be. Don't start with plain tofu right out of the box. It's not going to go well. Okay? Have someone who knows how to prepare these things. But think about it. Let's be fair. Would you eat an egg straight out of the shell? No. It has to be seasoned, right? So you have to season things. But you learn how to do that. There's tons of YouTube videos these days and ways of learning how to prepare these foods. Okay. Someone said, don't forget you are what you eat. And the other guy said, I need to eat a skinny person. So there's a strong food-mood link between high sugar, high junk food, low omega-3s. That's another thing I supplement, by the way. I get little gummies that are full of sugar. But that way I remember to take them. If they don't taste good, I'll forget. So I take omega-3s, and then low fruits and vegetables in your diet is going to be connected to mood as well. A Harvard University publication says diets high in plant foods and unprocessed grains with only small amounts of meat and dairy show a substantially lower risk of depression, up to 35%. You know, have you ever noticed that sugar is like a white crystalline substance? Right? It looks like a drug. It looks like cocaine. Not that I know what cocaine looks like. But anyway. You know, I've raised my kids with healthy food, and we had very few, and I'm not saying this is just because of the diet, but we had such a wonderful, peaceful home most of the time. Like, they were little rascals, and they got into trouble. But I think their diet really helped them have a more even mood, and they were just happier and better adjusted. And things have gone to seed since then, but anyway, we won't talk about that. All right, so I want to talk in closing about water. Water is a very powerful mental health impactor. Let me give you an example. I get restless leg syndrome. Do you know what that is? Restless leg syndrome is where your leg seems to have a mind of its own. It's freaky and alien. I hate it. It's creepy. So it's like your leg moves even though you don't want it to. It's terrible. So I was getting that at night, and so I was treating it. You can use quinine water. Quinine is a mood relaxer. I was trying magnesium, and those things helped a little bit. Come to figure out, the problem was I was dehydrated. I was stopping drinking water at like 5 in the afternoon because I didn't want to be up all night. But what I found was if I kept drinking a little bit more water, I would keep my blood volume up, keep myself hydrated, and I wouldn't be up at night any more than I would if I drank less water. So it was not necessary for me to stop drinking. A doctor had told me to do that. But I decided to start drinking more water in the evening, and the RLS went away. That's how powerful water is and how directly it impacts your nervous system. So the body needs 2 to 3 quarts of water a day. Your water softens food, it increases your blood volume, it transports nutrients to the cells, it cools your body, and it lubricates your joints and muscles. Dehydration can affect cognitive function. If you're finding yourself getting moody, testy, irritable, it could be because you're dehydrated. Get a drink of water before you go to the board meeting, before you go to whatever it is that you have to go through or deal with that difficult person. Here's how you can tell if you're dehydrated or not. I call it the toilet test. Your urine should be pale, not colorless, but pale. If it's dark yellow, you're too dehydrated. Drink more water. Hippocrates said, water therapy assays lassitude, meaning it helps mood issues, is what he's saying there. So it turns out that hydrotherapy is a very powerful remedy for mood issues and anxiety issues. I've experienced this firsthand. I had one of those Christmases a few years ago, you know, where you get together with relatives that you hardly ever see. And there's always that weird uncle that everybody, or whatever, that long-standing struggle that you have with a family member. And one of those things erupted, and happened to be staying in a place where there was a jacuzzi and there was an unheated pool. And the pool was very cold and the jacuzzi was, of course, hot. And so I decided that I was going to do hot and cold treatments to help my emotional upset from what had happened in this wonderful family vacation. And it was amazing how effective it was. So hydrotherapy was compared in a French study to the benefits of the SSRI drug Paxil on 357 patients with generalized anxiety disorder. Some were given the drug, others daily baths using natural mineral waters and massage. Both groups benefited, but the hydrotherapy group benefited more and stayed better longer. And of course, no side effects. So the principle behind water therapy, there are many principles, but one of them at least is there's a little bit of shock involved. And what I think is that it has an impact on your brain, sort of like shock therapy for depression. Shock therapy is very effective for depression. The problem is the side effect is loss of memory. So it's only used as a last resort. But when you're doing hot and cold treatments, it can be pretty shocking. And I think it can have kind of the same effect, honestly. So this is how I would recommend you do it at home. Take a plastic chair, put it in your shower stall. I don't want you passing out, hitting your head on the faucet and suing me, okay? So put a plastic chair in there. Always do this with your doctor's permission. Put a plastic chair in there so you don't fall over. And you do 3 minutes of very hot water. Don't burn your skin. Just get yourself nice and heated up. And then 30 seconds of cold, and you do that 3 times. If you have a jacuzzi and you have, the wherewithal, you can do the bath approach to it, but everybody can do a shower. So try that when you have low mood or when you have anxiety issues and see if it doesn't make an impact. These types of therapies have profound effectiveness, they can, and 0 side effects. The only side effects are beneficial side effects, like a boost of your immune system. Who doesn't want stuff like that? And cleaner skin, So try that hot and cold shower. And then finally, I want to talk just in closing about trusting in God. Trust is a big part of our mental and emotional peace, isn't it? Everybody needs someone to trust. Unfortunately, human beings can break our trust, can't they? We're going to be talking extensively about relationships tomorrow night, because that's a big part of our mental health. But let's just suffice it to say that human relationships can go really wrong, can't they? And some people end up in a situation where they don't think there's anyone they can trust, except maybe their dog, You have that dog that is just like God to you. But I want to tell you this, that you can trust God, that He's not like your friends. He doesn't have an ego. He's not going to betray you. He's going to be there for you at any cost to Himself. And He loves you with an everlasting, unfailing, and unfathomable love. And you can trust Him. And I want to share some research with you from a lady named Tanya Luhrmann. Because depending on how you see God, your prayer life will either benefit you or not. So this is what she says. Those who were able to experience a loving God vividly were healthier when God was experienced as remote or not loving. The more someone prayed, the more psychiatric distress she seemed to have. When God was experienced as close and intimate, the more someone prayed, the less ill he was. So depending on how you see God, your prayer life is either going to benefit you or not. So if you want to see God, if you want to see the love in God's character, go to your scriptures, go to the Bible. Start with the Gospel of John or the Psalms and read about the everlasting, unfailing, and unfathomable love of God. And that will comfort you and give you a basis for which to understand the rest of Scripture and a basis from which you can pray and ask God to bless you. How's that sound? All right, so we're going to go off of the live stream, I think, and the taping, and then I want to give you an opportunity to speak up if you like, and tell me what you